Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go in to the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Two things: download the app. The Veritas app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our content, not just the Frontline with Joe and Joe, and many past shows. So if you like what Joe and I do, all of our interviews are there, and also on social media. So if you like what we do, you could join us there at YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, X, and hey, help us out. Hit a like, hit a subscribe, hit a share, do all that fun stuff. So you wouldn't think that the topic today, which is near-death experiences, is going into the breach, but I got to tell you, okay, all the smart people in the world, all the atheists like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and people like that, they say that doesn't exist. That's a delusion or something, okay? Well, we have somebody here who's going to say, I don't know, I don't think it's something. I think there's something to that. And so we're welcoming Scott Smith to the front line with Joe and Joe to talk about his new book that is out from Sophia Press, and it is titled Near Death Experiences. And for those of you who don't know Scott, some of you out there do. Scott is a Louisiana attorney, author, father of 6 children. God bless him and his wife. He's the co-author with Father Calloway, who's also been on the show a number of times. Father Calloway of the Consecration of St. Joseph for Children and Families. His books include Pray the Rosary with Pope St. John Paul II, the Catholic Man book. I think we all need a little bit of that. A little Catholic manhood wouldn't hurt American culture. The Lord of the Rings and the Eucharist, The Theology of Sci-Fi, a new translation of St. Louis de Montfort's Total Consecration to Jesus through Mary. Scott regularly contributes to his Catholic blog, the scottsmithblog.com, and he's co-host of the Catholic Nerds podcast. Scott Smith, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe, brother.
Hey, Joe and Joe, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. This is going to be a great conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Joe and we'll get rocking.
Scott, we always begin with a prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Well, as Joe Pasillo just said, Scott's very busy. He's got 6 kids. He's married. He's working, but he's doing a lot for the church. And I want to bring that out. Scott, you're in the breach. That's what we're doing too. I'm busy too. So's Joe. Everyone's got to be busy. Everyone's got gifts. Everyone could do something. Scott, who can do it with 6 kids, wife, house, the whole deal, you could do it too. We all could do it, and we should do it. And if we do it, we'll make an impact on America. America needs us. We need to do this. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, Scott. I love it.
Yeah, sure. I am definitely a Catholic nerd. I don't know if you can tell from the list of books. I love delving into sci-fi and Lord of the Rings, and from a Catholic perspective. And it's a group of friends of mine. We're all nerds, and we like to analyze the world through that Catholic perspective, especially nerd culture. We'll get into movies and comics, all that really tape around the glasses, nerdy kind of stuff.
Well, what's funny is that, like, a lot of Catholics, God bless them, they would say, well, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be gaming. You shouldn't be like doing things like that. Oh, listen, I look at it this way, Scott. If you're Roman Catholic, you're a faithful Roman Catholic, you can engage with anything in the world because we always, as Catholics, keep things in their proper place. Whether it's playing video games, all right? Some people do get obsessed and play video games for 18 hours a day, all right? But some people just like playing video games, So I think it's great. Catholic nerds. When I went, I was caught your podcast with Trent Horn, who's another nerd.
Yeah.
And that one's posted on YouTube.
No, but that's great. I want to just comment on that. I'll be honest with you, Scott. Full stop. I used to be cool. I handed in my cool hat. I don't want to be cool anymore.
No, I
don't want to be cool anymore.
Cool.
I don't want to be cool. I don't. I completely gave. I don't like. You know how like they have the cool parent circle, like when you drop your kids off. I completely stay away from that circle. I don't want to be in that circle. I like my little circle, my little Catholic circle, my little family. I'm out. I'm out of the cool club.
Well, if you're a nerd, does that make me a nerd?
Maybe.
Well, hopefully.
I was going to say, hopefully, if you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, Scott Smith is with us. Now, he's written a new book, Near-Death Experiences. Now, that's out at Sophia Press, and you know what I'm about to say. Please don't buy it from, if you can, don't buy it from the big box places. Buy it from the publisher. Support your let's support our Catholic publishers like Sophia. And hey, tell your local parish bookstore to go buy a few copies available and go stock up the shelves. I promise you, people are going to buy the book. So near-death experiences. Now, let me try to put it like this, Scott. It's actually, fascinating topic. I can't see why anybody would not be interested in this topic in case you're just a complete materialist and you think there's nothing to it and there's nothing transcendent and there is no life after. But it is a big question for a lot of people, and the experiences themselves, when people tell these stories, they're fascinating. So, what was the motivation for you to write on this topic in particular?
Yeah, that's a good story because I feel like God pulled me into this one kicking and screaming. Before I really started researching this, I was very skeptical about near-death experiences, if only because I'd mostly only ever heard about them from a New Age perspective. And we've all learned to be highly suspicious of anything smacking of New Age. But I had written some books that got me an interview on a series of interviews on the Sean Tabbitt show. He's a evangelical, non-denominational guy who's written on near-death experiences, and it's a subject of fascination for him and everyone he knows. Like all the Christians, all the non-denominational people he knows are fascinated by this phenomenon, can't get enough of books about it, but he couldn't find anything from a Catholic perspective. And that's not good. So he's one that said you need to look into writing a book on this. There are some notable exceptions. Father Cedric Pesegna is a Catholic priest and near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of a comprehensive Catholic historical treatment of near-death experiences, there's just nothing out there. And even most of your non-denominational books about this, like Imagine Heaven, 5 Minutes in Heaven, all that kind of stuff, it's all contemporary accounts. What is unique about the Catholic experience of this, which like I said, at first I was skeptical, but once I started digging in, I realized, wow, this is not a contemporary phenomenon. It's not a New Age phenomenon. This is something that's been happening since I go in the book all the way back to Jonah, to the Old Testament, to St. Paul in the New Testament. Pope St. Gregory the Great, right after the fall of Rome, is talking about this. One of the greatest figures of not just Catholic history, but history itself, defined the entire calendar, the Gregorian calendar. You get to luminaries, heavyweights like St. Teresa of Avila, the Venerable Bede, and then up to modern day. And in the last 100 years, you have Padre Pio involved in near-death experiences, and you've got multiple accounts. And I kind of focused in on religious, on priests that have had near-death experiences, like Father Stephen Shire, and the particular judgment didn't go their way, but fortunately, they're given another shot.
Father Shire's story is, if I would recommend anybody. Well, first of all, go out and buy Scott's book, Near-Death Experiences. Buy it from Sophia Press. That story, when I heard him originally, because the videos are out there too, I originally heard him tell that story to Mother Angelica. All right, and I remember saying to myself, it's a reminder. We're not going to get on the topic, but it's a reminder of when you pay too much attention to the world. I think I remember him saying he was paying too much attention to the business of the parish that he was at and things like that, and kind of forgetting and not really doing his job. I'm paraphrasing, as a priest, or thinks he should be doing. Jesus didn't judge him very nicely. In fact, he judged him very harshly. But then in his mercy, gave him a chance. But that's a story I would recommend anybody look more into. So how deep into that story do you get in the book, Scott?
I get as deep as I can. Unfortunately, Father Stephen died within the last couple of years, so I couldn't interview him personally. I would have loved to. But his story brings out what's distinct about Catholic near-death experiences, and what I think is being left out of non-denominational and Protestant near-death experiences is not just purgatory, right? Which that's an amazing concept to get into, but the Blessed Mother. The whole reason Father Stephen wasn't sent to hell at his particular judgment was because all of a sudden, from the darkness around him, he heard this beautiful feminine voice advocating for him. Right? It was the Blessed Mother, our advocate. And as an attorney, the idea that the Blessed Mother is our lead counsel in the divine court, I mean, I don't need F. Lee Bailey. I'll take the Blessed Mother.
That's
every
right.
time.
We'll take the Blessed Virgin Mary. Like I said, you keep Johnny Cochran, even though
Yeah, keep
well, he
Johnny.
died too. So if you're just joining us, Scott Smith is here. Near Death Experiences is the book, and that is great to know. That see, I didn't know that. Joe and I say Scott on the show all the time. When we have guests on, it's because we want to learn too. Joe and I, we know a lot. But no, there's no question that we know the faith, but we constantly are learning from our guests like you. I didn't know that let's say going back into the Old Testament and into church history over the 2,000 years that there was documentation and people writing about near-death experiences. But then again, that's why we have you here, Joe Resinello.
Let's define our terms, Scott. In the book, you talk about some characteristics, what a near-death experience is. I mean, as a man growing up in New Jersey, going to ShopRite on Saturday is a near-death experience. So I want to get that definition out of the picture.
But don't remember, when we were kids, it was A&P.
Oh,
It was
that.
A&P
Going
when we
to
were kids.
ShopRite, where a crazy person with blue hair has that like look in her eye with the cart. She's coming right at you. You're like, okay, I'm out of your way.
That
So
felt like purgatory. That felt like purgatory.
Let's define our terms. What's a near-death experience? You talk about it in the book.
Yeah, so this is a very important distinction. The near-death experience, that phrase is more or less a modern phrase. It comes to us through the French, la mort imminente. There's a French scientist who studied exclusively the experiences of men who fell from great heights, and describe how they would see their lives pass before their eyes. And he coined this term that we now translate as near-death experience. But since that, I would have liked to talk to that guy too. That's an interesting case study. But since then, medical science, since about the 70s, medical science started really researching this phenomenon, and now it's growing, it's continuing to grow, and you have multiple independent studies out there where they will actually take multiple hospitals, take the emergency rooms, set them up in such a way to provide empirical tests for this phenomenon. And right now, there's the AWARE study, there's the AWARE 2 study. Fascinating. They provide basically a 7-step sequence of a near-death experience. They're also telling us how this is a not insignificant number of people, 17%, that do experience near-death experiences when they come with close brush with death. So the actual near-death experience, those 7 steps, not to go into each one of them in detail, but basically disembodiment, out of body, tunnel experience, light, joy, a being of light might encounter a being of light, God, Christ, a life review, right? Going through your life, seeing what your life passes before your eyes, right? Is a phrase you'll hear. Encounter, decision, right? Sometimes you're given a decision whether you want to go back to life or you want to go on, hopefully to beatitude. It's not much of a decision if your option's hell, right?
Yeah, tell me about it. That wouldn't be a very good idea. But I like the way you break it down, because a lot of, I guess, in the popular culture, when people hear near-death experience, they think that just that tunnel of light, and peace and joy, which, as you said, that's part of it. But there's something else going on here. There's that trial you were talking about at the end. Might not go your way. If you're just joining us here, Scott Smith is with us discussing his new book, Near Death experiences that's available at Sophia Press. So these uh these you mentioned some saints mystics. Give us like maybe one, Scott, like maybe if you can get into a little detail of a saint or mystic that's popular, that and what they've had to say about near death experiences, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think the one that was most startling for me, and really for a lot of people, is learning that Saint Teresa of Avila had a near-death experience. So she was dead. In her autobiography, she talks. She's like 22 years old. She had just entered Carmel, and she had to leave Carmel because she became deathly ill. She actually died for 4 days. Not only that, they had put wax over her eyes. You know, they had begun to prepare her body for the tomb. Her tomb was open. They had even said a funeral mass for Saint Teresa of Avila, and she comes back. Now, when I first read about this in her autobiography, she talks about being dead for 4 days, her sickness, how her dad never left her side, but she doesn't talk about what she saw when she died. So I panicked for a little while. I was like, "Oh, don't do this to us! Don't have this experience of death and not tell us about it." But thankfully, she did tell some of her family and acquaintances, some of her sister nuns, about what she experienced, and so other biographers picked up on that. And also in other parts of her writing, she does talk about her experience of seeing hell. So thankfully, she did provide us with the story and what she experienced. And the
Absolutely.
basic, I mean, it's she doesn't necessarily follow that sequence, but she talks about how the main things she was shown were all the convents in her life. Like she needed to live, and because she's gonna eventually be espoused to Christ. You can see her wanting to go directly to that, but Christ showed her that she was going to found all these convents, um, and all the great work she was going to do in her life, and then gave her the confidence in life to do exactly that. Uh, she was also shown a vision of hell, which was, uh, I'll tell you, I had nightmares. It kind of got into my head what she experienced. I can, if you want, I can get the quote. Uh, and it's kind of, you can see a hint of the tunnel experience here. She writes, the entrance I thought resembled a very long, narrow passage like a furnace. All right, so this is entrance to hell because she had led a sinful life earlier in her earlier years. Very beautiful woman. So instead of a tunnel experience towards beatitude, she's experienced a tunnel experience to a furnace, which is remarkable. The entrance I thought resembled a very long, narrow passage like a furnace, very low, dark, and closely confined. The ground seemed to be full of water, which looked like filthy, evil smelling mud. And in it were many wicked looking reptiles. She talks about those reptiles later on in the interior castle, like that prowl around the interior castle that you have to get through in order to enter into prayer. And then this is the part that kind of really got in my head. At the end, there was a hollow place scooped out of a wall like a cupboard, and it was here that I found myself in close confinement. So her torture, a person who is expansive in life, her torture in hell is to be confined, like in a very, very tight space. So these stories are just amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary when you think about it. Scott Smith joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Near death experiences. It reminds everybody out there, Scott. Let's stay close to the
Yeah.
sacraments. Stay close to Jesus. I want to be on the tunnel that leads to light. I'm gonna
Yeah.
hand it over to, or at least the one that leads to purgatory. I'm gonna hand it over to Joe Resinello.
You mentioned the saint. Let's talk about like people who aren't in the church who may have had like a cardiac arrest, they're in a coma. Because you do sometimes like hear a story that somebody, it's on like 60 Minutes, it's obviously it'll be like commercialized, whatever. But give us some of those takes because I think they're very powerful as well.
Yeah, I think what's interesting because the medical studies have been conducted not everybody who has a near-death experience necessarily goes to heaven, hell, purgatory, right? Some people just see what's happening to them as they're being resuscitated. They see their bodies, they see the doctors and nurses below them, and that experience of kind of rising above, looking down on their body is so consistent across time and across culture that these studies have been prepared in such a way, experiments are prepared to test exactly that. So what the AWARE studies do is in emergency rooms, that these are multiple emergency rooms trying to cast as wide a net as possible for people that might experience a near-death experience, like a cardiac incident. On the top shelves of these rooms, they put a picture, and not like standing up on a picture frame, but flat. So the picture is up, picture frame is flat on the shelf, so that if a person is up above their body, floating at the top of the room, they might see this picture. And so the analyst will then come back and see if that is described. And what's interesting is no one, even the doctors and nurses, will even know that that is there. They wouldn't, certainly the person lying on the bed being resuscitated unconscious wouldn't know it was there. And people actually come back and describe this strange picture that's sitting on top of the shelf. So it's amazing. This phenomenon is statistically significant, and it's amazing, right? It's amazing in our hyper materialist, empiricist culture, right? That doesn't believe in the soul, that medicine is actually designing experiments to test this, because it blows apart the idea that there's no life after death, or there's no soul, or that even the way we treat our bodies, right, is not significant, that sin is not significant. So it blows wide open those doors that atheists and materialists have tried to shut.
Scott
Give us
Smith,
an example, one, like just out of curiosity through your research, just doesn't have to be crazy, just an example.
Sure. I think I've got some from the AWARE study. Let's see. This might take a second. Okay, so this is a nurse's response to a patient. Okay, this is what she wrote. I was especially amazed because I remembered this happening while the man was in deep coma in the process of CPR. Okay, so in this particular case, a nurse reported having removed a patient's dentures and placed them in a drawer in a crash trolley. Okay, so the person's unconscious in a coma, and this is what the nurse reported. I was especially amazed because I remembered this happening while the man was in a deep coma in the process of CPR. When asked further, it appeared that the man had seen himself lying in bed, and they had perceived from above how the nurses and doctors have been busy with CPR. He had also been able to describe correctly and in detail the small room in which he had been resuscitated, as well as the appearance of those present, and where he started asking for his dentures. Like, hey, you forgot them in that trolley over there. So, it's not an experience of heaven, right? Hopefully we don't have dentures in heaven, but there's so many stories like this.
Well, you know what bothers me more than anything, Scott Smith, and I did mention it earlier, and when we started the conversation, the atheist, the materialist, is like they're constantly talking about science, science, science. But every time we bring up science to them, they're very dismissive to say, look, science is not just studying what's going on, in the planets and the galaxies and the stars, okay, and laws of the physical universe. Science is sometimes analyzing evidence that we call testimony, that people say that I've experienced this thing. Now, okay, one person says it is one thing, two people say it's another, three people say tens and tens and tens of thousands of people describing the same or very similar experiences while the same thing is happening to their own body. Either they're clinically dead or they're right there. And then they kind of dismiss it, and they're kind of like, well, and then I don't know what kind of excuse they come up with, because it's like, dude, you wanted the science. How about you? You look at this as actual evidence? We know what it reminds me of, Scott, and I love your comments on this a couple minutes before the break. You know what it reminds me of? 70,000 people. 70,000 people
Fatima.
said that they saw they saw the sun dancing in the sky at Fatima. 70,000 people said that, and they saw the Mother Mary, Our Lady. Okay. The ground, which was wet, was now dry after about a few minutes of this. Okay. The mud was up to their knees. 70,000 people said that. Okay. Richard Dawkins says, that's just a mass delusion. Do you see why I get angry with atheists at the front line with Joe and Joe, Scott? Because
Well,
no,
it's
70,000
amazing
people
to-
cannot have the same vision at the same time. Scott, please shut me up, Scott, and comment on that.
You've
before
never
the
been
break.
to a Grateful Dead
amazing.
concert, Joe.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
amazing how much faith. It's amazing how much faith these atheists have to not believe these things are happening. That's a huge
Right.
leap of faith to discredit all this testimony.
That's what I mean. It's like, you want, let's say, for like I said, you have all these people coming forward, whether it's near death experiences. And if you're just joining us, Scott Smith has written a book, Near Death Experiences. It's available at Sophia Press. We will click the link, or we will post a link in the description, so you'll get a discount. And it gets to be very, very frustrating, needless to say, Scott Smith. You could see my reaction to the Dawkins and the Harrises of the world. We got about a minute, Scott, before the break, and then we'll come back and we'll continue the conversation. Give our audience some social media, some websites, some links where they could find out more about you and what you have going on.
Sure, yeah, I regularly contribute to my Catholic blog. It's a lot of nerd topics, also typology, scripture, biblical, these sorts of things. thescottsmithblog.com, thescottsmithblog.com. I published a lot of my books. I have my own publishing company as well. It's Holy Water Books, holywaterbooks.com, or find them where great Catholic books are sold. But yeah, that's where you can find it.
Excellent. And we're very overjoyed that Scott has agreed to join us here to discuss this topic of near-death experiences. Remember, if you're listening to this on the radio, on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, please share this with your friends. It'll be available in podcast form from Veritas after it airs live. So please do that. Download the app and share it with your friends. If you like what Joe and I do, our audience is growing nicely, particularly on Rumble. So we would like for you to subscribe to us on Rumble, Frontline TV, or wherever you see us, X, YouTube, Facebook, until they take us down, which I'm sure they will at some point in the future. So we'll deal with that when the time comes. So please hit a like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. So Scott Smith is with us. We're talking about near-death experience. We're going to be back in just a few seconds, and we're going to continue the conversation. Stick around. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello. We are way in the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network with Scott Smith. We're discussing his new book, Near-Death Experiences, that is available at Sophia Press. We're going to post a link in the description. You can go buy it with a discount, and you could thank Joe and Joe for that. Also, visit Scott's blog, www.thescottsmithblog.com. I'm sure if you put in your email, you're going to have access to all of Scott's the things that he writes and the things that he does will pop in your email. Having said that, we're going to continue the conversation on near-death experiences. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
Well, Joe, you mentioned Fatima. Our Lady throughout history has reached a hand into the lives of people. This is factual. And sadly, people should look into this. People always looking for miracles. Well, there's a lot of them, and to be honest with you, a lot of scientists have no explanation as to why this has happened or why that has happened. Tell us a few, if not one really good situation where Our Lady reached a hand into, say, someone's life who was about to die to help them.
Yeah, and like we talked about with Father Stephen Shire, that's an amazing example of the Blessed Mother. So Father Stephen, briefly mentioned before, he had not really taken serious the supernatural side of his ministry. He had heard confessions, but had not really been faithful to going to confession. And so when he reached a particular judgment, Jesus, the divine judge, said, hell is where you're headed. And the Blessed Mother advocated for him and became a very special part of his life. And that's that's something that we just don't see in other near-death experience in non-Catholic near-death experience accounts. We and like you said, Our Lady of Fatima, that's one of the difficult things about writing a book like this is confining it, because the visions of heaven, hell, purgatory that the saints experience, the Blessed Mother shows, like to the children of Fatima, shows them hell. It doesn't fit necessarily within near-death experiences, but I want to talk about all this, right? Because people are interested in the last things and what happens when the veil is removed. So that is one thing we kind of struggled with, was keeping it just in near-death experiences.
One thing I would say, Scott, not necessarily on the topic of your book, but let's stay on the Blessed Mother for just a minute, because we hope there's some, non-Catholic Christians are out there maybe listening to us. I've had these conversations where we talk about the atheists and the materialists. You know who you have a harder time with talking about Guadalupe and Fatima? Protestants. Protestants have a very difficult time because they don't want to look at the evidence either. And God bless them. Listen, I don't ever doubt anybody's sincere love of Jesus Christ. If you call yourself a Christian, you're going to have to deal with Christ at your particular judgment. But here's my thing, Scott, and I love your comments on this as a Catholic brother, okay? I can't imagine Christianity without our Blessed Mother. I'm going strictly from a scriptura point of view, okay?
Yeah.
And particularly because at Pentecost she was there, okay? She was with the church, the apostles at Pentecost when the Holy Spirit came down. That's not just some throwaway line. Oh, and the mother of Jesus. That's not a throwaway line. She's there because she's the mother of the church. And we can go on and on about that, but I love your comments again, Scott, as a Catholic brother, that we need to talk to our Protestant brothers and sisters who, yes, are divided. And Christ does not want division, to say, dudes, you really need to look at our Blessed Mother. Okay, you really need to look at, and if you want signs and wonders, go look at Guadalupe, go look at Fatima, go buy Scott's book. All right, and go read some stories about our Blessed Mother and how she intercedes. When you're about to die or you have already died.
This is a subject of another research project I would like to do. But what's amazing is you speak to exorcist priests, and maybe it's not near-death experience, but it's an experience of death and dying. That in exorcisms, the overwhelming majority of exorcisms, the Blessed Mother shows up. And it typically occurs towards the end of the exorcism that she shows up to say, it's time for that demon to go. And when they see that beautiful woman come in their midst, it's like Looney Tunes, right? Where the trap door opens and there's that moment where they're just hanging in space, and then poof, they plummet. But what's fascinating about this, and to your point, is that Protestant deliverance ministries, especially those because they don't have exorcism, right? They have deliverance ministries, especially those that deal with, especially those conducted by anti-Catholics, like Pentecostals and that sort of thing. The Blessed Mother shows up in their ministries as well. They have pointed out, and we have several different accounts of Pentecostals and deliverance ministries noting that the Queen of Heaven shows up towards the end of the exorcisms, at the turning point in the exorcisms. But instead of becoming Catholic at this site, they say the Queen of Heaven is a demon, and she's coming to say that demon has to go, that the demon possessing the person has to go, which is, it's ironic because that's exactly what they said to Jesus when he exorcised the man in the Gospels. They said, you exorcise him because you are Beelzebub. You are a demon telling the demon to go.
You're right.
And isn't that remarkable?
It is. Who else would and would a demon call him itself, the queen? Like, none of it ever makes sense, and it gets very frustrating. You say, dudes, why don't you just admit the fact that you just don't want to be Catholic because you probably think that Catholics are the Catholic Church is a little too strict. All right, about certain things. I would respect you more if you said you disagreed with the church's teaching on contraception rather than dismissing the major role, Scott. The major role that Our Lady plays. She's the major player, not some tertiary figure. She's a major player in our salvation. My view, you can go straight to Jesus. And again, he's going to judge you at your
Yeah.
particular judgment. I'm going to go to Jesus through Mary. And as Father Karabi used to say, I bet I'll get there sooner.
Yeah, shortest, quickest, easiest path to Jesus, right?
That's
And,
right.
and one of the beautiful things that you see repeatedly in any accounts of apparitions of the Blessed Mother, and even in these near-death experiences, is she's not at first described as, oh, that's the Virgin Mary. No. And when Saint Faustina, Saint Margaret Mary, when Father Stephen Shire talk about their meeting with the Blessed Mother, she is first described as having the most beautiful voice they've ever heard. Or Saint Faustina, I think, describes it, there's a rustle of silk, and then she saw the most beautiful woman she'd ever seen in her life. Like, the first sensory experience you have of Blessed Mother is this woman is beauty beyond beauty, right? If this were a demon, it might be pleasing to the eyes, but it's not going to be this kind of beauty like beatitude. And then in their minds, they come to recognition, oh my God, this is the Blessed Mother, this beautiful woman. This is the Blessed Mother. And so, I mean, who doesn't want that to be their mother? Who doesn't want the to live every day in sight of not just beatitude, but this beautiful woman that is our advocate, can be, what the great goal of all the knights, right? All of chivalry, right? This is Our Lady. This is who we fight for.
That's what I don't understand. I'm going to hand it over to Joe Scott Smith, and I would emphasize to non-Catholic Christians, not anti-Catholic Christians, because they're not going to hear it. They're anti-Catholic, but non-Catholic Christians who have an open mind. Remember, the church has the fullness of the truth. To me, Mary just enriches an already rich story. You know what I mean? She's part of it. She's a major player. Her yes is so profound that no human being ever gave a response like that to God. And I wish they would understand that. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go?
Scott, I mean, we're talking about a little bit the demonic here. And we've had a number of people on the show. Charles Frawny, we had Dr. Dan Schneider. It inspired me to read Chad Rippinger's book, Dominion.
Yeah.
I mean, this book, Joe Pasillo, Christopher Columbus, this book is like insane. It's full of information, but it was like reading, I mean, it scared the heck out of you. I mean, I didn't know a lot about that, to be honest with you. And in fairness, full disclosure, I didn't put much credence in it, like in my life. I mean, as Italians in New Jersey, people have remember the horns, Joe, or people like out of ignorance. Italians,
which I found out later, like basically something you really don't want.
Yeah, you don't do that, but I mean, you'd see that in Italian families. They'd have like a cross and a horn next.
We had it hanging from the side, from the rear view mirror of the '83 Monte Carlo. What are you talking
about? Exactly. And frankly, that was common, and that's a no-no. So obviously, these are good conversations. They help me. I read Father Rippinger's book. I was definitely educated by it. But with that said, could these type of near-death experiences become sort of like a fascination that could lead us into demonic, similar to what Father Chad Rippinger talks about? Like there's portals, where you could kind of get into certain things, open doors to things that we should stay away from. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's very important. I'm glad you brought that up, because we don't want to get into necromancy, right? We don't want to be so many mystics, Saint Faustina, Saint Margaret Mary, even one of the near-death accounts I talk about in my book, Sandra Abrahams. It becomes a part of their daily lives that souls from purgatory are reaching out to them. And Sandra especially will say that she will not talk. People come to her when they realize she has this gift, if gift is what you want to call it, a connection. They'll come to her and they want to know where their family members are. And that's not knowledge that we need to be sharing. She is absolutely forbidden by God's law from being a conduit for people to communicate with the dead. Like that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So near-death experiences, when we talk about this, we have to be very careful to stay away from this occult kind of practice. A great book I just came across, Dr. Carrie Gress. It's the patriarchies in the title. She talks about how the Seneca Falls movement, women's suffrage, like they're writing their constitution at one of these spiritual knock tables. Like they would have a soul of the dead or worse that would knock at that table. It's in the Smithsonian, and to help them write and craft their documents. So we got to avoid that. Sandra Abrahams, she does give us some practical advice though, because it is natural for us to worry about where our loved ones are, and we should always be praying for them, especially if they're in purgatory. We should continue to offer masses, indulgences on their behalf. But if you're wondering where these people are, what she says is if they come to you in your dreams, because it is established biblically and otherwise that things can happen in our dreams. If we see them as radiant and smiling, there's a good chance they're in heaven. But if they reach out to us, our loved ones, in dreams, and they're sullen, morose, gray, sad, pray for them, right? Because there's a good chance they're in purgatory. And that, yes,
Go
sir.
ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
So and I think that is safe advice, because we don't want to. This is a narrow ledge here. We don't want to get into the occult in any way, shape, or fashion. The other half of this is purgatory, right? This is one of the characteristics of Catholic near-death experiences that's very different from non-denominational accounts of heaven and hell. They'll even talk about a place of waiting sometimes when you read the Protestant accounts of near-death experiences, but they won't acknowledge that as purgatory, which is interesting. But with Catholic accounts of purgatory, Sandra Abrahams having one of them, she was shown one of her relatives that had died that was in purgatory. And it was incumbent upon her to begin praying for this man. But the sad irony, is that this was a member of her family that were Protestant and didn't believe in purgatory and were against the idea of purgatory, even though it's a gift from God. It's God's mercy that we even allowed purgatory. But so when this man arrived in purgatory, none of his family believed in purgatory. There would be nobody to pray for him while in purgatory. So who's left to pray for all those people in purgatory are the ones that were rebuked in life for believing in purgatory, the Catholics. It's only the Catholics that are even conscious of praying for the souls in purgatory. So that, to me, that's a whole ministry, right? Because we are one body of Christ. We are the church militant, but there's the church suffering, right? That we, especially for our family members, but for all in purgatory, that we can offer sacrifices, that we can offer indulgences, so that they can be freed of that. And hey, maybe when they get to heaven, they'll start praying and interceding for us.
And what you're describing there, Scott Smith, is that I always think about that. At least as a Catholic who in the last 10 or 13 years, began to take the faith seriously again, is that it's the Trinity is it's a communion. It's three persons, one divine essence. That means that the church is it's a relationship, is what I meant to say. And we are part of that relationship. And when you look at it that way, it all makes sense. They say, well, why would you pray for the dead? Because they probably are in purgatory and they need my prayers. That's why. And yes, when they get to heaven, when they start now as light as a feather, because the burdens that they brought on themselves in their life is now gone. Guess what they're going to do? I'm going to tell you this. One good practice that my wife and I picked up, we picked up many good ones, mostly due to my wife. When we pray the rosary, which is nearly every day, hopefully we get to it every day. One of the intentions always is we want on one of the first three beads is to pray for the holy souls in purgatory, particularly those who have no one to pray for them.
Yeah.
And we humbly ask for their prayers in return. To me, that's one of the most beautiful prayers that you could pray. If you're a prayerful Catholic, to pray that, because I think it was Our Lady. We talked about Our Lady. I forgot when or which apparition it was or who she communicated with, is that the shame that there's so many people in purgatory who are stuck there and who have to really wait it out. They have to wait it out, okay? Because no one in life will pray for them. I wish, Scott, that many people out there would listen to what you're saying and listen to this conversation. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, Scott Smith is with us. We're discussing his new book and other things. But because we always go off the rails. I hope you don't mind. But we're discussing his book. That's the reason why he's on the show. Near-death experiences. And I wish people would remember any obsession. You mentioned being obsessed with communicating with the dead or things like that. Don't be obsessed. Don't worry about, if you tell people, I remember a relative of mine when my father died said, do you think he's in heaven or hell and I said, I have no clue. They wanted me to say in a very wishy-washy way, oh, he's in heaven. I have no idea. I'm not Jesus Christ. I didn't judge my father, but what I did say to my relative was, pray for him. I bet there's very few people that were at my father's wake that are actually to this day, he died 18 years ago, that are actually still praying for him. I pray for him every single day. And I could cry when I think about it. I hope that if I get to heaven, my father wasn't living a Catholic life, I hope I see him and I'll know it was my prayers that helped him along. I wish people would realize, that's my larger point, Scott Smith, I'll throw it over to you. People realize that our faith, we are in a relationship with God and we are in a relationship with other people. That's why Jesus said, love God first, then love your neighbor as yourself. I love your comments on my little rant there, Scott.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So indulgences got a bad rap, right? Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses partially because of the rampant sale of indulgences as going on at that time. All right. But just because the sale of indulgences needed to be curtailed doesn't undermine the idea of indulgences, plenary indulgences that are offered. Like this is, whenever this airs, if we're still in proximity to Divine Mercy Sunday, right, there are huge indulgences that can be offered for going to confession, in proximity to these great solemnities, to offering, to praying for the intentions of the Holy Father, which can be a dicey prospect, but whatever. But
that's a whole other show. Go ahead.
That's a whole other show. But indulgences are there for us, right? For our own sake, but we can offer them for our loved ones. A plenary indulgence we can offer for our loved ones, especially around the Feast of All Souls and All Saints. So, and none are wasted, because if we offer them for a specific loved one and that loved one's already in heaven, it goes to somebody who needs it. No prayer is ever wasted. And if you're consecrated to the Blessed Mother, consecrated to Jesus, to the Blessed Mother, you just give her all any merits that you happen to earn in this life. You just let her magnify and multiply those. Imagine what she can do. I mean, she can send an earthquake, way greater than the earthquake that hit New Jersey recently, through purgatory. And so Saint Faustina talks, I mentioned briefly before about how souls would come to her and Saint Margaret Mary from purgatory. And Saint Faustina was being shown by Christ, a person, souls in purgatory. They were seeing the flames of purgatory licking at their bodies, right? They were burning alive, so to speak. in purgatory. And St. Faustina asked them in the midst of all this suffering, what is your greatest suffering? You know, assuming they're going to say, well, probably those flames, right? At your feet. And they said, no, the greatest suffering for a person, for me and for a person in purgatory is the proximity to God, the proximity to beatitude, to be so close, yet so far, the longing for Jesus. When the veil's taken away and we see the world for how it really is, to be so close to Jesus and not to be able to be with him.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine a greater pain. It's funny. I'm going to hand it over to Joe. We only have a few minutes left, Scott. But when you mentioned about was it Saint Teresa of Avila, and she went, she saw hell, that carving out of that wall and that hollow space.
Yeah.
That is my biggest fear of hell. Aside from the fact that it's eternal separation from God. It's funny that you say that you're mentioning that, because that's what I always have in my head. That's hell, being in that very, very, very confined space that you brought in kind of on yourself through your sins.
It makes me
let's
want
put
to
it like
just take a deep breath, like, because in such a confined space, your lungs you can't take a deep breath. It makes me just want to breathe in the air that God gave me,
Yeah. We have about 4 minutes left. Joe Rossinello, let's make it quick, brother.
Scott, why do you think God permits this? Is it a warning? I mean, because clearly, again, people, that's why we do it on the show. We bring voices in like yourself, talking about people who've documented this, both the secular and the religious, talking about God almost reaching a hand in the beyond to somebody to shake them up. Is it a warning? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think it's a warning. It's an opportunity. It's a blessing, and it's a curse. And I'll explain that. Pope St. Gregory the Great, when he's talking about this phenomenon, says that, yeah, you're given a second chance, right? But you don't have the same expectations of you now that you've seen the reality of what lies beyond the veil. Now that you don't need, like, we need faith. Well, there's evidence, like what I'm talking about is evidence, but we, like Thomas, right? We have not seen these things. When you do see these things, heaven, hell, purgatory, the reality of all these very daunting, scary, or beautiful things, it has to change you, and you're called to a higher level of holiness in life than before. So it is a warning. It's a second chance to live life better. But I mean, literature talks about this. This is the story of Scrooge, right? This is A Christmas Carol. He's kind of shown, and it's kind of based on Dante as well. He's kind of shown heaven, hell, and purgatory by the three ghosts, right? And now he's expected not just to give back, donate the great turkey and the coins that he wouldn't give to the charity at the beginning of the story, but he's supposed to give new life, right? He becomes like a Saint Joseph to Tiny Tim, right? He becomes a great father figure. And that's just as an analogy. That's anybody that comes out of a near-death experience, Father Stephen Shire, they're expected to do great things. Saint Teresa of Avila, right? She was shown what this new opportunity at life could bring. And St. Teresa of Avila ultimately, it changed, what she did in life, it changed the course of history. She's the one that gave us our devotion to St. Joseph. I say this in full recognition of being with Joe and Joe, right? The popular devotion to St. Joseph, it came in part through her work. So yeah, there's great importance to these experiences.
So Scott, I tell you, we could talk to you. We could talk to you for hours. I will comment on this, and then I want to throw it over to you. Let our audience know where they can find more about what you're doing. If you want to see if you want to feel purgatory through a great actor's monologue, if you ever watch Mel Gibson's Hamlet, Paul Scofield plays his father. That comes and sees him in the beginning. And obviously, Paul Scofield is one of the greatest actors of all time. And he describes, and just with his face and the way he moves, the way he talks, and he's describing his pain. He's describing what he's going through, and then he's cooled off at night, but then he's got to go when the sun rises. I would recommend if you don't want to go to purgatory and you want to go straight to heaven. All right. If you think you are, put it like this, if you think you want to go to purgatory because you're not going to make it to heaven, you'll do everything you can to avoid purgatory if you go watch Paul Scofield play his father and describe purgatory for you. Scott Smith, what do you got going on?
Well, we got this book. We've got I've been enjoying digging deeper into the biblical near-death experiences side of this. Jonah, we didn't even get to talk about that, but and St. Paul, getting to learn about stoning. Like, stoning's not what we think it is. It's not a mob. It's a juridical process of execution. Anyway, this has opened up whole new fields of research for me, and I'm enjoying digging deeper.
Well, hopefully when you get a chance, or you write a new book, or even if you just want to have a conversation with two crazy Italians from New Jersey, brother, you are welcome. You are welcome back here anytime. Needless to say, thank you so much, Scott Smith.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks, Joe and Joe.
You got it. And listen, if you're out there listening to the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, please share this, particularly if you're listening to it on podcast. If you're watching it on social media, YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, please like, subscribe, share. Click the link in the description. Sophia Institute Press. Buy the book, Near-Death Experience, written by Scott Smith at a discount. And visit Scott's blog, www.scottsmithblog.com. Give him your email, and you'll be able to see in your email everything Scott has going on. So, Scott Smith, thank you once again. Thank you all out there for joining the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.